Online data point method, so that's ongoing work. I want to first highlight its work. Work with Jean-Luc, past master student of mine, Iman Shamez, so a longtime collaborator of mine, and then myself. So this is in a line of ongoing work where we aim to have a fully online entire point method. And I will take all my application and motivate the work in electric power system, notably with the optimal power flow. So let's start with a broad introduction of what's going on and to really locate what we want to achieve with that. So very general context, renewable power system. We're injecting a lot of renewable sources of energy within the grid. Here, first disclaimer, to me, renewable sources of energy won't be hydro. While hydro is great, it's actually just very, very great, but it's also limited. So let's picture non-synchronous renewables like solar and PV, which really up the challenge of operating and planning a grid with power system. So we're integrating those kind of renewable sources of energy at a very high pace. And this is great. We're tapping into a virtually infinite source of thrill. Fantastic for us. But on the other side, it means that everyone wants to tap into this source of thrill. So the demand is greatly increasing because many sector of activities are also electrified. We can think of transportation. We could think on the demand side of just people moving from gas heating to electric heating. Maybe that's not the super common in Quebec, but just moving one province both sides, and we'll get a lot of gas heating power plant. But that also mean more heavier industrial processes as well could be going toward electrification. So this change means that we're definitively subject to some inherent uncertainty that goes, yes, on the demand side, but we're kind of used to that, but also on the generation side, because the mere perturbation in the solar in the natural phenomenon we're tapping into can affect our power generation. And that leads me to my last point. We're also now operating on a much, much faster time scale. We're at the renewable time scale, meaning that any change in forecast, in weather can affect the power generation we're having. This is great. And I just mentioned the downside, but there's also an upside. And I kind of hint toward that in this part. We're also using inverters to interface our renewable sources of energy to the grid. That means that not only do they fluctuate on a fast time scale, but we can also control them on a fast time scale. So at least there's this small victory here. So moving to the renewable time scale, that means that power system will need to redefine what they consider real time. For now, in power system, we call real time 15 to 30 minutes, which sounds like an eternity to me, but yet that's the standard. So we'll want to move toward, I don't know, second, even sub-second time scale, so that we can really match the power and the demand in real time. That also means something that is interesting, the significance or the importance of the unit commitment problem, where we want to decide when and which gas turbine is to be fired, will decrease as the penetration of renewable increases, meaning that we can focus on just rebalancing the portfolio of renewable we have that are highly flexible up to their maximum and do not have to solve this large-scale mixed integer program. So, and that altogether would encompass what I'd call real-time optimal power flow, the key problem that we need to solve to have real-time operation. So that'll be the main application that I'll be pursuing today. So let's get toward real-time OPF. So for those of you who are familiar with the OPF, I mean, OPF is the canonical optimization problem in power system. It's nonlinear, it's non-convex, and hence not our favorite to solve, especially if we want to solve it in real time. One of the main strategies to tackle them or to reformulate them in a tractable way are conic relaxation. We can think of semi-definite programming or second-order cone programming, which are the two main ones. Yes, they're tractable, but they're still computationally intensive, especially if we go at large scale, not with the 33 bus system that I'll be presenting. But if we want to move further than that, 1,000, 2,000, and so on, that will become very demanding. And hence, while we made one step toward tractability, this is not enough of a big step to get to real-time or online OPF. So current approach, to put in perspective the work I'll be presenting, to real-time OPF would be end-to-end learning. So we learn the solution of some specific optimization problem, maybe via supervised learning, or we can do something similar with reinforcement learning. This is great. Okay, and the other approach we can have is something like an online linearized OPF or feedback optimization that linearize a problem and then just resolve the problem. But here, both are limited when it comes to constraint satisfaction. That means I cannot provide a certificate that all constraints will be satisfied, which, to my opinion, is a limitation because that is actually very central for a safety critical application like electric power system operation. So to tackle this problem, we'll design a new online convex optimization with time varying constraint, which I'll call constraint OCO, to solve the OPF in real time. So just to showcase a bit what's coming. So I'll propose the online interior point method for time varying equality constraint, which is fast and computationally light. And so this is thanks to the fact that I'll remove any projection onto a feasible set made of conic constraint. It admits time linear equality constraint, perfect, so I can capture the time varying nature of the demand. It admits generalized inequality, so I can work with my conic relaxation. And lastly, it has a provable regret and constraint satisfaction performance guarantees, so I can also tick the box of the safety critical application requirement. So let's dig into it. The plan for what's coming, we'll define the OPF, the optimal power flow. I'll define the online convex optimization, and then we'll get to our algorithm, a streamlined version of it to get a bit more even faster. And finally, I'll talk about why am I kind of hammering the fact that I love that it is not projection based. I'll just reconnect this with the OPF and to better illustrate my point, and then we'll have a numerical example and some concluding remarks. So let's consider a standard power system. So here I have a synthetic grid of Texas just to give you some sense. So I have buses, which are every node in my system. I have a set of generators, a set of loads, and a set of line, and I need to minimize my quadratic generation cost, which can either be pictured as fuel cost or just a proxy for efficiency. Here, I'll assume that my lines are fixed, but this is definitively a nice direction for future work to relax that assumption. So my OPF, the non-convex nonlinear form, which I'll call the AC OPF, you can suggest that every OPF is AC current and AC voltage, and you're absolutely right, but the literature adopts AC OPF as the standard unrelaxed, unapproximated. So my AC OPF will take the following form. So first I have my quadratic generation cost over here in P, where P is my generation. I have some active and reactive power limits that can be pictured if this is sandwiched to a single value, that's my demand. Otherwise, it's the range of generation I can have. I need to constrain my, my voltage magnitude within my system. And then I have my power flow and nodal balance over here. And lastly, I need to ensure that no line melts. So I have my line loading limits, which are thermal limits or ampacity in a sense. This is good, but this is the non-convex version and can be a bit of work to be solved. To quickly grasp at why it is non-convex, let's picture this constraint. So this is a donut, so I cannot fit a line, it's non-convex. And the other one, first, it's a equality constraint and it's not affine. We can already think it's non-convex, but also if I relax it to an inequality, that's the canonical saddle function. So I have identified right off the bat two sources of non-convexity. So what can be done to circumvent the non-convexity of the problem is to use relaxation. So relaxation we'll be pursuing here are SDP, semi-definite programming, and second-order programming, SOCP. So the first step to get that is we lift the dimension of our problem, and we define now this new complex variable W, which is assumed to be Hermitian or set to be Hermitian. And we get now this linear, this affine equality as our power flow and nodal balance. Next, to make sure that this connects to the initial problem, we need to add two other constraints. The matrix is positive semi-definite, and it has rank 1. With those two combined, that means that it has a decomposition and that this decomposition is rank 1. So we get that V is equal to V emission. And so we have fully reconstructed the problem. So if I use these constraints with the one I just showed, it's equivalent. I get exactly the same thing. So it's as non-convex as it was. But now what is the semi-definite relaxation is that I will now be dropping that constraint because this is the one that bothers me. I kind of push the non-convexity the furthest away that I could. And all now in this one, I remove it, and then my feasible set increases, and I get a convex optimization problem. It will now take the following form, which has a few changes that I identified in red. Because I'm constraining something that is more kind of a square voltage magnitude, I need to square those things, no worries. I have my lifted equal to affine constraint, and then I will have my semi-definite positive constraint over here. So this is great. It's actually exact in some under some condition. For example, a sufficient condition for exactness is radiality, which is fantastic because every distribution system are built radial. That would be a very nice way to showcase this relaxation. But even otherwise, it's a very good approximation of our ACOPF solution. That said, semi-definite programming, if you have encountered that in the past, can be computationally burdensome. So when the system becomes very big. So what we can do is further relax that constraint so that we have something that is more lightweight. This yields the following constraint, which now is a hyperbolic constraint. So what I did is I only ensure or enforce this semi-definite programming, this semi-definite constraint on 2x2 submatrices, yielding that equation. So this hyperbolic constraint can be rearranged, and I'll do it on the next slide, so that we obtain a second order cone constraint, leading to the OPF, to do our next relaxation, the SOCR OPF. So that's my last problem. That's the one I'll be using later on in the example, but I just wanted to show two examples of conic optimization problem for OPF. So that is the new one. So here I use let's say the canonical form of a SOC constraint, and I get the whole thing over here. Perfect. So, and then we lose the nice exactness result I had, but it is still generally a good approximation of the OPF. That said, this is again not lightweight enough for real time. If I want to solve it every 15 minutes, that'll be okay maybe, but if I want to do every half a second, that'll be too much on a large scale power system. So that's where we connect it to online convex optimization as a way to take this problem and actually solve it in real time. So let's define online convex optimization. So in online convex optimization, we'll have a sequential decision-making problem or a sequential problem. And at round T, 1, 2, 3, up till big T, our time horizon, I want to solve the following problem where x of t or xt is my decision at time t, and curly x is a compact and convex decision set. One may say now, yes, Antoine, this is just an optimization problem. That sounds pretty easy, especially that you told us that it's convex. But that's where it becomes interesting. The objective function that we'll need to minimize is only observed after the round. So there's a predictive aspect to it. You don't know what's going on, but you still need to minimize it. I will make no assumption on the distribution of the sequence of ft. Can be stochastic, it could even be adversarial. I'll have some maybe Lipschitz or boundedness constraint, but that's it. And also, I'll expect an answer very fast. So say sub-second again. So that fits well what I wanted to do at first. So there's a prediction aspect to it, and we have no time to make a good decision. So don't expect solving a full-on optimization problem. You'll need to be more clever about it. So the canonical or the standard algorithm to solve this kind of problem is called the online gradient descent. So it's a single step of a projected gradient descent. So how the OCO framework will go around this problem is we'll implement decision xt. So I send it to the system. I observe the loss, f of t xt, and then I compute the next decision. So I get ft, and I'll be preparing the decision for x plus 1, which is one, as I said, projected gradient descent step, where eta is my descent step size to be tuned. And then we have my projection with respect to some norm onto our convex set. So this is great. And the beauty of it is that by its simplicity, we can analyze it further and really guarantee and see what's going on. Now let's consider a more general setting. I'll be adding a second line over here. I need to satisfy, yes, the same curly X as before, but then I'll add another set of constraint, call it curly X T. So the first one, you can picture it as there's some constraint like voltage limits. You always need to be between 95% and 105% of the nominal value. Perfect, that never changed through time. But there are some constraints that evolve through time. And XT will actually capture that. It'll model the time varying constraint of our problem. That can be my load demand. It will definitively change through time. And I can also think of my renewable maximum generation. As I said, maximum is set by the natural phenomenon, but I can curtail or spill it afterward. And then I'll make similar assumption for XT than I did for FT. That is, we'll only observe what's going on or what are our constraints after the fact. So that becomes kind of interesting. I need to tackle a objective function that I don't know while meeting constraint that I don't know. What can I do? So in this work, we'll be a bit more humble about things, and we'll actually consider this problem, which is a subset, let's say a subset of the problem I just showed. So I'll assume a linear objective function, but that's no constraint because I can use a slack variable and just send it to the objective, and I'm fine by it. So this is just for me when I'll be working on the proof. I'll assume a fine equality. I need it to be convex, so there's only a fine equality constraint. And I'll add in that V can change through time. This is perfect because that captures time varying load. Perfect. And then the equality constraint I will consider while being time independent. I'll have them generalized so I can work with conic optimization. So they're all with respect to some proper cone. Think of SDP or SOCP. So that means I can leverage all my convex relaxation. Great. Now, okay, to make sure we're on the right path, we need a way to analyze our performance. So here we'll use two performance metrics because we have two things that changes through time. Optimality. So I'll need to be equipped with a optimality measure device, and we'll call it the dynamic regret. What does the dynamic regret tell us? It compares our approach performance with an oracle that always plays the hindsight optima. So the hindsight minimum is always our comparison. In implementation, we'll never use that. This is really for design purposes, but that's how we can design our algorithm. Then we need also feasibility. So we'll have a similar metric of performance, which will capture the cumulative distance to feasibility we'll have. So here there was a bit of tweaking to be done. So we'll have dk, which is our distance with respect to some generalized cone. So proper cone. And then the second one, I think it's a bit more explicit. If you're not zero, we pay the price. If it's zero, that's good. So we need to be feasible. Great. Then what's our objective? What do we want to do with those kind of things? We want to bound these metrics such that the regret and the violation are sublinear. What would that imply? It would imply that on average, our decision, the decision our algorithm takes will go toward the round optimum while avoiding high losses in the process. So not only do we want to converge, but we want to make sure that we don't kind of find a spot that is absolutely catastrophic. And this is the same for the violation. Will be on average feasible while avoiding far from feasibility constraint, which again, picture our safety critical or our, central system, the power system is. This is very important. To be done, we'll need one last thing. Okay, actually two. We'll need some measure of how dynamic the problem is. Here, dynamic refers to how the problem evolves. So we'll first have for the regret analysis, the cumulative variation called VT, which is the off-off distance between the hard min at one time step and at another time. If you picture an optimization problem that is, say, strictly convex, that has a single optimum, that just means the difference between two round optima. And then we'll also use the violation for the violation analysis. We'll have here the sequence of all the load, in our case, the PD changes per one. Great. Let's get into business. Let's define our OIPM algorithm. So first, we'll consider, so the approach we'll be taking takes root in the path following form of the integral point method. So we'll be using barrier functional. So we'll define phi as the barrier functional, which is the sum of some other barriers. For example, if I have box constraint, I'll use minus ln of minus the constraint. And then if I have the semi-definite cone, I'll use minus ln of the determinant of that variable. And so these are my barriers, meaning that if my constraints are not satisfied, then this term skyrockets. Then I'll rewrite my optimization problem without inequality constraint. So that's my new form. Here, I want to minimize d of eta. And this is just a small variation on the same theme. So as opposed to the canonical form would be objective plus eta or plus 1 over eta of phi. Now I'll just make it the other way around. And again, this is all to help me when I'll be proving performance. And I'll keep the equality constraint. So here we can observe that as eta grows, we'll go back to an optimization problem that shares the same optima as the initial one. So our strategy is to incrementally increase eta while iteratively solving our problem. Let's make a few assumptions before we get into the result. So let's denote curly d as our feasible set. And then I'll need curly d at every time step to have a relative integral that is compact and convex, non-empty. I'll also bound the complexity of my barrier functional. So this is a standard term, so it will be given by the soup of this term. So if you notice here, and that'll come very often, I'm evaluating the Hessian norm of my gradient here, meaning it's the quad form where my quad product is the inverse Hessian of the problem. And yeah, I'll come back to that. Then I need my Hessian to have non-zero, my augmented Hessian, let's say, to have non-zero eigenvalue. And I will also a maximum difference between the changes between two routes. Great. So what does this algorithm looks like? Perfect. Now there's two steps. We first start by implementing our decision xt. Great. We observe the consequence of our action. So here, that's our objective, but also we get the new constraint vt, say our new loading, and we need to adapt. We'll first perform a t-step, that is basically an infeasible Newton step with the scaling parameter eta t. Once this is done, there's another step to be done. We'll call it the eta step. First, we increment the barrier scaling factor eta, and then we perform a feasible Newton step in this case. When this is done, we get our new xt plus 1, and we can send it to the system and tackle the problem. Great. So putting all together the assumption we made and making sure that we start in a feasible point, in a initial point that is within a certain, which has certain characteristic, we will get regret and constraint violation that are both bounded by this term, which is more importantly OVT plus 1 and VB in this case. So one thing that we may notice is what's going on with 1 over none. I'm expecting a bunch of constant and a bunch of parameters indeed. This is really much the consequence of having Hessian norm over here that makes things just fantastically good looking. Okay, so if we're in 1/9 in this specific norm, then we're good. So that's why that's my note over here about notation. Great. So in sum, if we look back at what we did, we have an algorithm that permits online optimization of generalized inequality constraint problem. And we also can tackle time-varying equality constraint problem, and it uses no projection in the process, as it is based for the first time in the literature on an interior point method approach. It also enjoys simultaneous sublinear regret and violation bound, given that VT and VB are sublinear, which are standard assumption in the literature. But now let's discuss some more. Can we streamline our approach? That is, can we squeeze a bit more? I don't know if it's being more practical, being more implementable, but can we squeeze a bit more out of it? And that yields the other question, what is actually our tolerance to optimality? Do I always need this X stars? So that's the question we'll be asking ourselves. And indeed, in some application, and I believe power system would be one, we're willing to accept some kind of deviation from the optimum. Call it epsilon, epsilon being our non-zero tolerance around the minimum. And you'll see when I'll do my numerical example, I can use some epsilon has basically no consequence to the problem and still be of interest. When this is done, what we can do is actually only use the T step, and we'll be able to have a more computationally efficient approach that still yields some performance guarantee. So to do that, we'll translate our openness to an epsilon error by a new definition of the regret, call it epsilon-regret. So now I just added this magenta, this epsilon here, meaning that any point that is in this region to me is acceptable. So here I'm just saying that if you're within that bound, I just clip it and it's 0, good for you. At this time, what I can do, as I mentioned, is only use the T step with the difference that now my eta parameter, so my barrier scaling factor is fixed, but it has to respect a certain condition, which basically means that it must be large enough. So analyzing the problem, if we just make sure that we have this eta here that is a function of my epsilon, I can get very similar result that I did before, but this time in terms of epsilon regret. So my epsilon regret is still OVT, and my violation bound is also VT. So here, what did we do? We traded algorithmic simplicity for a looser regret definition. So again, that's the user that needs to define. So now, just before moving to a numerical example, I want to discuss projection. Why am I so proud of being projection free? Great. Okay, let's take time. So as we mentioned, conic constraints are important in power system operation because that provides us with a good approximation of the problem while still keeping the detectability of the problem. Hence, we need to be able to account for generalized inequality. So if we were to recall the first order OCO algorithm that I presented first, the OGD, and we consider that we're solving, say, the optimal power flow in real time. What does that mean? We implement decision XT, we observe the consequence of our action, and then we compute the next decision. So XT plus 1 is now the projection of my objective, could be my Fred curve, which I'll translate to that. That's just another way of writing the problem. So find the point Z that is the closest to the projection form, exactly projection. Okay, let's dig into it. So what we have over here, for simplicity, I'll just assume that we're doing that with respect to the Euclidean norm and actually to the square Euclidean norm. We can do with other norms, but that's actually the one we always picture. So I think it's a fair demonstration here. So first line is exactly this. And now, okay, I'll just rewrite this curly X. What is curly X? Curly X is my affine constraint and a bunch of generalized inequality. Great. In the context of OPF, what is it? It's a bunch of constraint plus an SDP constraint. So basically, what did I do with my OGD? I said, I'll solve a problem with a quadratic objective, which was exactly the same as the OPF, such that it must respect conic constraint, which is exactly the same as the initial problem. So basically, the online problem has the same complexity as the offline problem. So can we really expect to be real time if we're doing so? So that's why I am very happy about the fact that we remove the projection. It's because we do not have to do that. There's no free lunch. Nothing is perfect. We have a linear. We have a set of equations. We have a linear set of equations to solve. I wrote it as a matrix inversion. Of course, we'll never invert a matrix, but still, there's this system of equation that needs to be solved. Of course, nothing is is free. So that will be the new bottleneck as opposed to the conic projection. So this is really the beauty of the algorithm, is that we're able to remove that from the problem. Okay, so let's conclude with a bit of a numerical example. So I'll be my own enemy and use only the 33 bus system, but we'll do it in real time. So I'm the operator, I'm solving this, and there's some perturbation in my load that is happening, and it's kind of moving toward a new state, and I want to track the optimum with my real-time OPF. I'll be using the second order cone relaxation of the OPF, but in a real-time fashion. So just to remember, that's my new problem. That's the problem I want to solve. The only thing I did is I wanted to have my linear objective. So I use a slack variable, and life is good. I can solve this problem. And so that's the one I'm solving in real time. So let's say my numerical setting, I'll be using my standard algorithm with some barrier terms, eta 0 and a beta that is 1.02. And in the other case, that's where I wanted to attract your attention. I'll use this humongous barrier parameter and this epsilon of 1.5%. That will turn out to correspond to a tolerance of 0.001% of the optimal cost, meaning that we'll all agree to lose 1.5 cents an hour, which seems pretty acceptable again. So that's the link I wanted to do. And we'll compare it to the closest work to ours. It's a heuristically modified version of the modified online saddle point algorithm that we needed to adapt to a generalized equality. So the comparison is to be taken with a grain of salt. It's not a perfect comparison, it's just the closest work. And we'll look into regret and epsilon-regret and the terms of violation. So that's my one figure for the regret. What we have here, what's important to note is that in that specific example, we really outperform the heuristically modified MOSP. And then we have both the epsilon and the non-epsilon version of our algorithm. For both, there's two curves. So dashed line is the dynamic regret. And as expected, the dashed line of the OIPM-TEC is sublinear. Now, it is not sublinear for the epsilon-OIPM-TEC. Indeed, but I never claim it was. For that one, we studied the epsilon-regret. I did not prove, and I did not actually attempt to prove it, but indeed, if we were to track exactly the optimum, that approach is insufficient. That said, if we were to look at the epsilon-regret, that we accept anything that is within this interval of FT, yes, it is sublinear, and it actually reaches it very quickly. Non-epsilon-regret is a stricter performance metric than epsilon-regret, so of course, we get to enjoy it in the OIPM-TEC as well. Then in terms of violation, we're much better with those two algorithms with the online integral point method to control our constraint. So the violation we're suffering is much less than the MOS, for example. So here, we can see that the cumulative regret and violation are controlled. And so epsilon or OIPM-TEC performs well and it performs better than our closest work. So great. So to wrap up, real-time optimal power flow will be at the center stage of future renewable power system, giving the shift of timescale those resources are operated. We propose to use online convex optimization to bridge the standard OPF to this timescale. And in our work, we worked pretty hard on including generalized inequality and time-varying linear equality as a component induced by the problem we're considering. So we formulated the online integral point method for time-varying quality constraint optimization, OIPM-TEC, which is a projection-free second-order update using barrier functional, so a path-following integral point. And we also defined the epsilon version of it, the streamlined version that aims at an epsilon tolerance around the minimum of the problem. We provided provable guarantees, both in terms of sublinear regret and violation bounds, and we illustrated the performance of our approach on an online OPF problem. So what's coming next? Oh, plenty of stuff. So first, I would like to add a T to my G. So I want the time varying generalized equality constraint. That's for one. because that will also give me a nonlinear objective that can vary through time. So many of that, then there's also the problem of inverting matrix. So how can I improve this process? So we're also investigating approaches in that regards as well. So this is all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed it. There's a reference to the paper, and I'd be happy to have questions, both in French and English, and just to discuss some more as well. Thank you.